Hi, Susie. How are you?
I'm good, Alan. It's lovely to see you again.
Yeah, it's been some time. Good to see you too. Thank you so much for helping me with my Values Jam challenge in October. It's been a great start to the month. And so, where are we? Day 7, and I'm on target actually. So that's good.
Well done. It's quite an achievement, but no, I love these conversations. So anytime I'm welcomed back and asked to do them, I'm like, yes, I'm there. I'm on it. So,
Let's get into it then. You've got a deck there, haven't you? So why don't
indeed.
you cut the deck? Is it shuffled?
No, I'm just going to shuffle it right now.
All right.
Trying to not look at the cards and
Yeah.
the names on the back, going, oh, that's a good one. I'll have that one. Right. So just pick one at random.
Why don't you cut the deck 4 times?
Okay. In fact, I'm going to turn it this way, white side up,
Okay.
just so I don't see the big letters on the back. Okay. Four.
So from your left-hand side, choose pile 3.
Okay.
And then how many cards have you got? Oh, let me just choose number 7. Number
One,
7.
two, three, 4, 5, 6, 7. Justice. Oh, this is a big one for me. Oh.
Now actually, I seem to remember that justice is big for you, right?
It is. Really, I have. I think if I was a stick of rock, I would like justice would be running through me because I get really challenged when there's injustice and inequality and um, people just not being treated fairly, or not even just people, just situations, anything. It triggers me so much.
Well, this is going to be fascinating then, because it's kind of
That's so
obviously
funny
it's
that's come
really
up.
obviously it's really important for you. So I'm going to enjoy that part of it because you're kind of emotionally invested.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
And then it's also going to be interesting for you, I think, because we're following, like the first question is going to be, oh, can't wait. Come on, let's dive in. First question.
Okay. First question. Let me put my glasses on. I've started wearing glasses now, Alan, since we
Okay.
last spoke. Okay. What does justice mean, look, feel, sound like?
Do you want to go first or do you want me to go first?
You go first.
All right. So justice. For me, justice is the right outcome, the fair outcome. And it's probably enabled by some entity that is not necessarily involved in what has happened. So it's this kind of objective, impartial, I hesitate to say wise, but it should be,
Yeah.
way of arriving at a treatment that is right and proper and fair for whatever has happened. And then from the metaphor point of view, what it looks like, everybody kind of understanding why, not necessarily being satisfied or happy, but having an understanding and regarding it as being kind of acceptable, more than anything else. So I'm thinking, in a divorce situation, for instance, people don't get exactly what they want, but they probably understand why the outcome is the outcome. What is it?
Not always.
What does it sound like? Justice. What does it sound like? I think it sounds like, that, like agreement. It's not enthusiastic agreement, but it's okay kind of agreement.
Interesting.
Yeah. And what does it feel like? I think it feels like an orderly process, and with that might come frustration, actually. And also a feeling that it's not your decision, it's somebody else's decision. So you're not actually, you don't own it or control it. It's kind of put on you. Yeah. So what do you think of what you've just heard, and add something to that?
There's so many questions I want to ask and say. So what the first thing you said about it kind of being about right and like a third person, an objective person making that decision, and which you hope would be wise. And immediately I just think humans are flawed. So conscious system, humans are flawed, all of us, even the wisest ones. And what is right or wrong, it will be very subjective to that person and their experiences. So I think the justice comes in the development of ourselves to understand and go by our own moral compass, because innately we know what is right and wrong, and we know when we're behaving in an unjust manner, or and I would love for there to be self-ownership and censorship and responsibility, I suppose, that when you do wrong, you own it, you learn from it, you take responsibility for it. And that fundamentally, when we look at our justice system, because obviously that's a place where justice is, questioned and challenged, and wise people sit there on the bench deciding who gets what and what's going to happen and what the repercussions. And they essentially are never going to hear all the facts, because if somebody is a victim, say, or being perpetrated against, then the person that's done that, unless they take full ownership of it, are going to lie. They're going to try and sway it a different way. They're going to, you're not going to get the truth. Now, somebody sitting on the bench, say a judge, for example, may see through that. However, how can you really understand what that, I'm not going to go victim, I'm going to call them survivor. How can you really understand what that survivor has gone through?
Yeah.
And what will ever be justice for that survivor?
Yeah.
And when you're saying about what it sounds like, what was it you said? It feels like an agreement, I think you said, or sounds like an agreement. I can't remember.
Yeah, was that?
That's it, yes. And I think for me, it's a much bigger expression. It's like a yes, a punching in the air, because it's validation that you've been heard, that the person has been exposed that might have hurt you, or the incident that's happened. The truth has come out, basically. And when truth is revealed, it changes everything. We cannot move forward in society, in humanity, in relationships without openness, transparency, and truth. Because when we're not being true to ourselves, when we're not being true to other people, we're living a lie, and there will be conflict. There'll be issue there. So until truth is there, and when we get truth, that should be celebrated, like a real massive punching in the air celebration, because anything below that is just more lies, more cheating, more. You just can't operate. You can't have a solid relationship with anybody. You know, whether you're in the workplace, whether you're in romantic relationships, your family relationships, whatever dynamic you're talking about, if truth is not there, then the relationship is going to have issues and flaws and problems.
Yeah, what you've just talked about here is prompting a question around the justice system is devoid of emotion. Yeah. Right? It's very
sometimes.
Okay.
I'm going because yeah.
So the purpose of
it's supposed to be, I suppose. Yeah.
So the purpose of it is to get to the truth and be objective and make a decision. It's the way that I see it. But what you've just described is really high emotion, and I'm thinking of, for instance, the people that have fought for justice for the Hillsborough victims, for instance.
Absolutely.
For a lifetime, actually. And when there is, inverted commas, justice, you can understand, real emotion going on there. But actually, from the system's point of view, the decision is the same, right? It's like the decision is the decision.
Yeah.
And it's actually the effort and the pain and the journey of the people that they've been through that probably is the reason for the emotion being at the level that it is. And that contrast between the lack of emotion and the strong emotion just struck me as being a bit weird, actually.
I mean, ultimately, if you replace the word justice with truth, because, somebody getting a punishment for, or, a cover-up happening and it being exposed, it's the truth that sets the individual free. There's a famous book by David Icke, The Truth Will Set You Free. And that statement is so true, because if you have been wronged, which again is another subjective thing, so what's wrong, what's right, but if Hillsborough, there was a cover up there trying to hide the truth about what happened. No amount of what the courts can impose, fines, punishment, jail sentences, that's not actually what sets you free.
Yeah.
It's the truth of knowing you've been heard, you've been validated, and what's your gut instinct, what's your, not even beyond gut instinct, everything you knew to be true has been highlighted, has been told, has been voiced. And it's the truth, really.
So that's prompting a question, which is, so if what you say is right, and I'm not questioning it, because I think what you're suggesting makes a lot of sense to me. But then the question that comes is, so is the focus of the justice system on appropriate punishment the best way to deal with it? Because if truth is actually the real valuable thing, isn't the focus on punishment a bit of a distraction?
Completely. I mean, that's going to take us down a whole different road. But I mean, the thing, when you look at this, well, my view, I should say, but the justice system, it is focused on punishment and, who's right, who's wrong. This person's wrong, let's punish them. But again, if we take back truth and say, okay, well, what is the truth of why this person took the actions they took? What led them to this? Where did we fail as a society that did not support this person to have all their needs met in order to thrive, reach their potential, and give back to society, be a fully functioning human being that can have positive, empowering relationships, can, be a part of the working community, volunteering community, whatever it is. Why is this person taking from society because they've got nothing, they feel they've got nothing to give or nothing to offer, or they're in a position where they have no capacity to do that. And we have to face some uncomfortable truths about how we failed a person, because we are doing it collectively. It's not just one person's fault. There's lots of systems that play into that. And if we get really honest, a lot of those systems are failing. And we are failing people as a result.
We might have touched on this before. Have we had the conversation about how in Zulu culture they treat people when they do something wrong?
Yeah.
So just to refresh, what happens is that the person stands in a circle with all of the tribe people around them, and the people in the tribe tell stories about the individual when they have done good. So this person who has done wrong just stands there and hears all of the stuff that they've done really well. And that's what they do. That's it.
I mean, how lovely would it be to hear that instead of being told, you're bad, you're bad, you're bad, that you did this, you did that.
Yeah.
However, equally, there are people out there doing horrendous things.
Yeah.
And, the fact that they're doing these horrendous things, there's been lots of failures along the way. Nobody was seeing the truth of what was going on for this individual. Nobody saw the red flags, the markers that were indicating this person is on a trajectory that is not a positive one. And sometimes I think those warning signs are well hidden. Other times, and I've had experiences in my life where I'm like, those warning signs were obvious, and they've been ignored. And we see it. I mean, how many times do we see, a tragedy happening to a poor child, and then, a huge investigation into all the services that were involved in that child's life and the trajectory of failings that have happened.
Yeah.
And nobody joining the dots and going, putting the jigsaw pieces together and going, what's the big picture here? It's just this person doing their role and that person doing their role, and nobody, the connection not being there.
Yeah.
And again, that comes down to resources, stresses, human flaws, all the things. But again, it's just pausing to sort of say, in every situation, what is going on here? What's the truth? Being aware of your own unconscious biases as well, and your own agendas. Because we can all be guilty of wanting to see this narrative and ignoring this narrative, because that's a very uncomfortable truth and we don't want to admit it. And we do that all the time.
Yeah.
In lots of areas of our life. But really coming down to having an honest appraisal of, again, it's ultimate mindfulness, isn't it? It's been having an honest appraisal of every situation, every action. And, we just living these very busy lives where we just do. And we don't ask, why am I doing this? Why am I reacting this way? Why am I taking this action? Why am I not taking this action? And having that honest, truthful appraisal. Can you hear my cat?
Yeah, okay.
Come on, come here. I'm just going to pull her out because otherwise, come on.
There's also something about, you talked about systems failing and the need for the systems to be functioning well as part of, and I'm thinking about the justice system here. It was a story that was told to me by somebody who was a prison governor. And he said he was on a train and on the train, there were two guys that had been released that day, and he was sitting within earshot so he could hear the conversation. Mm-hmm. And one of them said to the other, "How much money have you got?" And the other one said something like £17.50. And they were both going to London, and they were talking about having a few beers to celebrate. So, what he said was, I immediately thought they're going to be back inside in no time, because they've got no money for somewhere to stay. Yeah. They're going to get drunk. Then they're going to do something stupid. Yeah. And the whole thing starts again.
Yeah.
And so in that case, that I worked in commercial hospitality management. I just thought to myself, what you need is a customer experience, end-to-end process of this whole thing, to ensure that when people when they've served their sentence, if that's what's happened, how are they integrated back into society to be a useful, valued member of that society, rather than, that situation is bizarre.
That happens all the time. I remember, I'm going to give him a shout out actually, because a guy I interviewed when I worked for the BBC, so try to stop this cat, Charlie Martin, and he worked with offenders that were rehabilitated, trying to rehabilitate them into the community. And he told me the same story, that, when they're released from prison, this is here in Scotland, I don't think they got as much as 1750. It was a paltry amount. I thought, then how can you begin? How are you going to get a job because of your background? Who's going to take you on? Most of them have either got completely dysfunctional families. So if they're going to go back into that environment, they're going to be going back into a life of crime, possibly. If they try and deviate away from that and say, okay, I'm going to stay away from those people, the people that I got into trouble with, where did they go? They've not got money, they've not got accommodation, they've got no sense of belonging. And the only thing they can do is going back to prison, because actually, at least there, they've got a roof over their head, they've got food, and there's a sense of belonging. And if you're told that you're worthless constantly and you can't offer any value to society, then at least go back to prison where you actually do get some significance, especially if you're a big name in the prison, or a high offender. It's where do you get your significance from? And where do you get your sense of belonging? Where do you get your family from?
Yeah.
All these things that are needs in order for us to thrive, or, in some cases, just survive, not even thriving, just surviving. And if the prison is the only place, then, that, again, the system sets people up to fail. It's not releasing people from prison to thrive. They've done very well. There are rehabilitation programs going on in the prison. However, they're not probably dealing with the psychological, mental, physical, environmental issues that led to that person ending up in prison in the first place.
Yeah. And there's two things that come to mind there. One is you're talking about employment. So are you familiar with Timpson's, the company? So they actively recruit ex-offenders. Yeah. And they do such a great job. And James Timpson is just passionate about the value of these people that, when given a chance, can add so much value. And they have loads of examples of people that are now running Timpson shops. Yeah. They didn't start at that level, obviously, but they got there. And I actually linked to that. I did some work with a prison, and the people in the workshop that were smartest, brightest, adding most value were the men. the people serving their sentences. They were so much more on it than employees. And so, what a waste it is if that isn't turned into something good for society.
Well, that's it. I mean, that adversity that you're talking about, that these men and women have experienced, gives them great insight.
It does.
Into life, more insight than you'll get from your life just being plain sailing.
That's right. Yeah. And then the other story that comes to mind is I was chatting to this guy, and so the caveat at the beginning of this story is that I'll never know whether he was telling the truth or whether he was just spinning a yarn, but I took it as, in good faith. He was probably about my age, and he told me that the longest period of time that he had not been in an institution since he was something like 15 had been 18 months. So the longest period of time that he'd been out of an institution through his whole life was 18 months. And
when he was a baby. It's worrying, isn't it?
Well, so what he explained was that the previous year he had lost his mum and his brother, and they were his last remaining relatives. And what he said was that made him realize that, his words, although he had messed up his life until that point, it kind of brought home to him that he could still do something because he's still here. They weren't here anymore. And he said, so I've decided to go on a course so that I can help young offenders because I'm the very best person.
Yeah.
I've got so much experience.
Oh, bless them. And that's it. Turn your adversity into something that you can use to help others. And what a purpose that gives you.
Yeah. So on the card, Suzy, there's 4 questions in the middle. Why don't you choose another one for us to play with?
Okay. When have you experienced justice?
Well, seeing as you know the subject, or because you're so close to the subject, what about the question where you make one up? How'd you fancy giving that one a go?
Oh God. Should have prepared for this. However, the problem I've got, I was immediately looked at the first question where it says, where have you noticed injustice? And I thought, I'm sure I can tell you about that without, because it's an ongoing injustice that I see.
Let's avoid that one then.
Yeah. I mean, I see injustice in the world all the time, but a question.
The question is question 5. It says, ask your own question. Yeah.
Ask your own question about justice. Who, what, where, when, why, or how. Okay, the question that's come to mind, I don't know the answer to it, but how would justice differ if we took judgment out of justice?
Oh, judgment. All right, so my immediate thought, so that in my mind, I just see a courtroom and a judge, right? And this question is causing me a challenge because they are making a judgment. That's what it's called. In order for justice to be given. So if you remove the judgment, is that even possible? Because in order to arrive at a decision, somebody somewhere surely has to make a judgment, don't they?
Well, okay, so judgment, I was thinking in lots of different areas. Yes, there's the kind of judgment of how will we punish this person? What are we going to do with this person?
Right.
But it's the judgment of the crime that they've carried out.
Right.
You know, the judgment of the person, this heinous person has done this. And if we replaced it with a question of, rather than what judgment are we going to pass or what punishment are we going to pass, we replaced it with, how can we help this person to offer value to themselves and the world? You know.
And maybe I think there's a case for broadening it beyond that, because just thinking back to my professional career, when I was running a business, if something went wrong, which is kind of what we're talking
happens.
about, my focus was always, how can we prevent this happening again? So imagine if it,
great question, yeah.
What you're saying, you know, about the individual, yes, for sure. But then imagine if it was a bigger question than that about society. How can we prevent anybody else being in this very same situation?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, that's not to say that that person doesn't experience some kind of recourse, repercussions for their actions. I think that is important. However, there has to be that preventative measure so that it doesn't happen again. And that's a challenge because, well, it's certainly a challenge when you're dealing with the most abhorrent crimes. And, you know, you've got survivors, victims, people that are in great pain and do want justice, but I just do not know what justice is ever enough for somebody that's lost a child, that somebody has, you know, been abused, has been persecuted against. I don't know what justice, I don't know any of our systems that could possibly ever give justice to that person, even if a person is locked away for the rest of their life so that they can never hurt or harm anyone else. The families are still left with that, their own prison sentence.
Yeah, and you know, so this is something else about when we're talking about justice, because justice seems to aim all of the focus and the, by definition, resources at the perpetrator rather than the survivor.
Yeah.
You know, so what's fair about that? That's
there's an injustice right there.
Yeah.
The person is just left to get on with it and find a way, you know, to navigate this pain that they are experiencing. And, you know, that is a journey in itself for them to find their own truth. You know, what is justice for them? How will the truth set them free? I always remember I listened to a podcast of a guy, it was in America, and a guy had, he'd actually adopted a young girl and raised her, and she was in her teens, and this guy had broken into the house while she was there alone and raped and killed her. Really horrendous crime. And, you know, the father was just not, as understandably, completely bereft. And, you know, the guy was caught, he was locked away in prison for a very lengthy sentence. So, you know, essentially justice was done, but that did not help the father. And he started writing to the prisoner because he needed to know what it was that had driven him to it, why he had done this. And it started, they still have this relationship today, and it's helped him to forgive. But I mean, they had something like a 4 or 5 year relationship where, you know, they were meeting regularly before he actually asked him what happened that night. And, you know, he wanted to know the kind of the details, last moments of his daughter's life.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, rightly or wrongly, why he wanted to know that, I'm not sure I would have wanted to have known that, but he needed to understand. And, you know, he did say that that helped him forgive. Now, he says it's not, you know, it's not about forgiving what he did, but the forgiveness was more for him to be able to move on. And again, it's that the truth set him free.
Yeah.
Even as abhorrent as that truth was,
yeah,
he was able to know everything, process it, and find a way to move forward. And I don't know if heal's the right word, but certainly move forward with a different mindset than he had done. And that would have never have come if he hadn't built up that relationship with the attacker, the prisoner. And, you know, this prisoner he wasn't just the murderer of his daughter. He was, you know, somebody else's son. He had interests in fishing and various things. And, you know, there was a whole bigger picture to him. And this was just one aspect of his life, a heinous aspect of his life, understandably. But, and I mean, it's a powerful podcast. I can't even, a Radio Lab, do check it out. It's, yeah, I don't know if I'd have the strength to do that, but I know certainly there would be something in me, if, touch wood, I'll never ever be in that position, but I would want to know the ins and outs of this person and what drove them and took them to that point.
What you're talking about there, it's I was chatting to somebody about this quite recently, about how the difference between, say, me sitting here being in my position versus somebody, you know, we've talked about being in prison or somebody else being homeless. The difference between that outcome might be very slight in terms of sequence of events or decisions made during the journey. And it's quite scary when you think of it like that, actually.
A really clear example of that is when we get in our cars every day and we drive somewhere, and a momentary error of judgment, where you stupidly check your mobile phone, or, you know, the kids in the back distract you, you know, and that leads on to causing a horrendous fatal accident, you know, killing other people, killing members of your family. I mean, that person can be a model citizen their entire life in that split moment. And of course, those families that have been widowed, you know, bereaved, they want justice. And then where does the judgment come about? Because we can, again, that's a very white middle class kind of privileged position, because we can all be there. You know, we're all guilty of being distracted behind the wheel for some reason, you know, having a bad day, you know, whatever it might be. And we just, in the blink of an eye, life can change quite significantly.
The drama series with Sean Bean in it.
Yes, yeah. Oh, that was excellent.
That the story? Wasn't that the story?
Yeah, he did. Yes, he was drinking and he got behind the wheel and then it caused an accident. But but even with drinking, like the morning after, you know, you might think you're okay. And you're not okay, you know, and many people will make that mistake each day. And 99% of the time they will get away with it. One day they might not, you know.
And it's that example that you've just given, actually, you know, you can imagine somebody who has led a good life, been a great citizen, and then made this one mistake and maybe, like you say, killed somebody. And then it's like, well, what a horrible person you are, and how could you do such a thing, and all of that judgment that comes based on one tiny amount of time compared to years and years of doing good. So in that respect, the justice, again, I'm struggling to understand whether we're talking about justice or the justice system. We seem to be talking about a justice system a lot. But it feels very inadequate, actually.
But again, for the family, take the justice system out of it. What would be justice? Well, I mean, look at, Madeleine McCann and the McCann family. The judgment that has been placed on them time and time and time again. Now, whether you agree or you don't agree, that the punishment or the recourse that they have to live with as a result of the actions they took from leaving their children in the apartment, which many parents will have done. And the judgment would have been far more had it been a non-middle class white family. And it would have, I mean, they've been vilified anyway, and people pass opinion left, right, and centre. But we all do things each and every day that, quite frankly, could go either way. And most of the time, we get away with it. But there are times when some people don't, and then that's where it comes in. And it, again, taking the justice system out of it, what will ever be justice for that situation? Because when you have made an error of judgment, then you're the beating yourself up, the shame, the guilt, the remorse, all of that is probably worse than any prison sentence. Because there's got to be a lot of, well, you've got to learn to live with it, forgive yourself, but also, can you ever forgive yourself if the bereaved family, if they can't find forgiveness, or they're still angry, they're still upset?
And what you're highlighting there is another shortcoming, is that, and I guess it has to be designed this way, justice is designed in a vanilla fashion. It's kind of applicable to everybody. But actually, each individual situation is itself and no more than that. So when I used to work for Marriott, there was a model that we used for problem resolution. And so there was a kind of process that you went through in order to understand the situation and then decide what to do about it in response. But the underpin of the whole thing said you must always look at the situation through the guest's eyes. So what it was saying is, exactly the same thing could happen to Suzy as to happen to Alan, but perhaps they need a quite different response because it's affected them in completely different ways. And the justice system doesn't actually do that because it's designed to have one way.
Yeah, it's based on evidence, and sometimes the evidence isn't there. Oh, well, I was going to say, not so much the evidence, but because I think the evidence is there, but...
Well, is it something to... So this is making me think about how justice is based on the factual outcome, whereas that Marriott problem resolution thing was based on the emotional impact.
Which is taken into the courts now. But again, taking it away from the justice system, we all have a moral compass. we know what is right and wrong for ourselves, first and foremost. And if we operated in alignment with that value, that's going to serve us very well in life.
But how do you deal with the differences there, though? So, for instance, if you imagine thinking back to the Troubles in Northern Ireland, imagine a victim or a family where somebody's been killed, and then look at it from the perpetrator's point of view, and their view is that they're fighting for their freedom. So,
okay, so that perpetrator, I would then want to explore and say, okay, when does it become okay to kill another person and to fight for freedom? You know, when does it become okay to persecute and do what is being done to you, you know?
But you just now, what you said was, we all know what's right or wrong. But in that situation, the view of what is right or wrong is quite different.
But equally, if you sat a person down and got them to tune into their moral compass, even fighting for your freedom, I understand it's not as black and white, but fighting for your freedom, is it okay to kill another person? Would they be comfortable with that?
I think
if you're defending yourself in terms of a one-to-one attack, and again, well, I was going to say, going back to the whole political arena of Northern Ireland and all the rest of it, again, look at the truth of that. Who was actually creating that war? And when you look at all the other wars and when people are being persecuted, who is actually creating that? Because it's not the people living in the villages and the towns and cities. It's not you and I. It's not the everyday man on the street.
Yeah.
The truth will set you free, because if the truth came out, I mean, it's the classic triangulation that you get in narcissism, where you've got a person at the top going, these people are saying this about you. And these people over here are saying this about you. And these two are never talking, and they're just believing this person at the top.
Yeah.
And that's how wars are created, persecution, all because fear comes into it. And fear is driving it. If I don't kill, I will be killed.
Yeah.
According to this person here.
Yeah.
That's just standing back. I mean, we see it with our governments. We've seen it all during the pandemic, the divisiveness that's gone on. You know, it's been horrendous. It's awful. And, you know, without going down conspiracy theories, when you divide people, you can control them.
Yeah.
And when people unite, and I'm talking about the man, the woman on the street, when they unite, they cannot be controlled. And when you always comes down to truth. Justice and truth I don't think they can be separated. Because when you get the truth, you get justice for yourself and for everyone else. Might be an uncomfortable truth, and I think there's been a lot of uncomfortable truths exposed during the pandemic. I mean, you look at Boris Johnson partying all through the pandemic, and it's just like, where's the accountability?
Yeah.
And how does that make people feel? Talk about an injustice there.
Yeah.
Those images of the Queen sat there on her own at her husband's funeral. How horrendous. How many people that couldn't attend their own loved ones' funerals?
Yeah.
Looking through the glass doors of the care homes. I mean, that's injustice. All of that.
And again, that comes back to the lack of understanding of the emotional impact. So in that situation, like you said, you know, people not being able to hold the hand of their mum because they wanted to do the right thing. when somebody like that was making those different choices.
Which then brings it back right to narcissists or narcissism, because narcissists do not understand emotional impact.
Yeah.
Oh, correction. They do understand emotional impact, but they don't care, because that actually fuels them when somebody else is having an emotional reaction. That gives them fuel supply. And I mean, I am fundamentally believe that half the problem, not even all the problems in the world, are because narcissists are making decisions and they do not care about the emotional impact that it has on people. And they're creating triangulation, divide and conquer, separating us, isolating us, and doing everything to keep us from uniting and getting a revolution to overturn everything.
I think that is a powerful and provocative statement to end that stage of the Values Jam, because let's move on to the final question.
Oh, damn it. Come on, let's explore that one. No, sorry. That's just my opinion. It's just what I've observed. And
I think
I'm just saying, sit with it.
For people listening or watching this, I'm sure it gives food for thought, and it might well lead to some fascinating conversations. So Suzy, the last question on the card.
Okay. What are you encouraged to do differently about justice as a result of our conversation? I think because this is a subject very close to my heart, I've done a lot of deep inquiry and exploration into it. I mean, the first thing that sprang to mind was to be less judgy, you know, but I think I do that anyway, because, you know, when I hear these horrendous stories on the news and what have you, I do always think, gosh, what happened in that person's life that led to that? I'm curious about that. Now, I know there'll be a load of people listening to this and thinking, oh, bloody liberal lefty. But the other flip side of it, I can be absolutely outraged equally by somebody's crime or actions and just think they need locking up and never releasing. But I've always, my experience, so I'll tell you, my background was, as you know, working in the BBC. I had an 18-year career, and I remember often reading the newspapers and, you know, it would be like, right, let's get that person on, we want to interview them. And the headline would be some horrible headline. And then I'd phone that person up and I'd find out the truth behind that headline. And, you know, the headline was always sensational. It was always to get the reader's attention, you know, make them buy the newspaper. And then I would hear the truth of that person and think, oh my God, that's horrendous. This person's been completely taken out of context. They've been misconstrued. They've been, you know, they've been persecuted in a horrible way. And I think actually, if we could all just question what's that person's backstory. I mean, it doesn't take away what they've done, but it helps to have an understanding. And as a result of that, then we can start, as a society, asking that question that you asked, you know, how can we prevent this from happening again? And we should be asking that question a lot more than we are doing. Because we don't seem to be learning from mistakes. Nothing in this world is a mistake if you learn from it. Because it's been beneficial. And I get so upset and angry that we don't learn from the mistakes. I'm like, how is this being allowed to happen again? So what am I going to do differently? Keep having conversations like this, Alan. Keep trying to open up the debate about learning from our mistakes and living a life in alignment with our moral compass and our values and authenticity, and doing what I do, encouraging people to grow and thrive. And yeah. I mean, it's just what I do. It is my mantra. I can't, I kind of feel like I am in line with that. And had we had this conversation 15 years ago, it would have been a very different story. But I've arrived at this place where I'm quite congruent and authentic in what I do.
Yeah.
So I have my off days. Don't get me, I eat my junk food. But yeah, in terms of moral compass and values.
I think for me, what I'm encouraged to do differently about justice as a result of this conversation is to be more mindful of that human emotional dimension. Because I think up until now, I've thought of justice as a very technical, it's like a remedy. This has happened, therefore this is what needs to happen.
Here's the consequences.
Yeah. Whereas what we've talked about in terms of two levels, actually. One is, what is the emotional impact on the survivor, which sometimes I think that's kind of just not given due focus. And then the second bit that you mentioned, which is, what is the backstory of the perpetrator? Why has this person done this? And it makes me, this is not really a thing that I'm going to do, but it's made me wonder about how we're all products of our environment ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the big question mark has to be over, why is our environment creating these people who do these things that you then want to punish? But that's another whole new conversation, probably.
Yeah, that requires a whole new cultural change. And yeah, probably not one we're going to see in our lifetime, Alan.
No, I think that's right. So thanks very much for the values jam around
thanks
justice.
very much. Yeah, I enjoyed that. That was a good one. It's funny because the last time I think I got love and justice, and I'm just like, wow, like two pinnacle values of mine. So yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you.
Take care, Alan.